when I think about what brought me to liberty from being a staunch conservative, it was discussions on Facebook tempered with reading that was brought about by these discussions. I mean, as many of you know, I do part of my degree is political science. I specialized in political thought, and so I read lots of political philosophy in college, but it was, the confirmation bias was horrible. I was looking for things that supported my view, and then looking for really bad arguments made by socialists or communists, things that I could, dismantle fairly easily. But talking to people on Facebook, some of these ANCAPs, these anarchist capitalists, and libertarians and voluntarists, I got in touch with them, and we would have discussions on politics, and I would also talk to some communists and some socialists, and obviously we would get into heated arguments, and it brought about a change in me when I started thinking about the principle of my beliefs. Because if your beliefs are not rooted in principle, what are you doing? And unfortunately, that is a huge problem with conservatism and, liberalism. The hypocrisy is astounding. And that's a problem. And that's why I stopped being a conservative. I'm still considered conservative, obviously, because I'm a constitutionalist, but I'm a libertarian. I root my beliefs in the notion that people ought to be free. And I don't mean that in the generic, faux patriotic sense where I just kind of think some things should be regulated, and I kind of think some people should be free in some ways and not others. Once you start to decide on what your principles are, once you start to get into this mode, this way of thinking, where you have your principles being brought into question, and I don't mean being tempted or anything like that. I mean going out and looking for the root of all of your beliefs. You'll find that some things cannot just be all one or all the other. You'll find that conservatism has a lot of authoritarianism in it, meaning a lot of government control that ought not to be there for a free people. And especially the same for liberalism. I mean, they think the state is your friend and government spending is so completely necessary. And yet they purport to believe in freedom, and they try to pass off some of their beliefs as freedom, and it cannot be defined that way. Principles matter. How you get to some of these government freedoms, government regulations or quote-unquote freedoms, it matters. It matters so much and so intensely that to not see this distinction is to not think. And to not think is to not be alive. For example, gay marriage. Now, a lot of you listening are sitting and thinking, gays shouldn't get married because marriage is between a man and a woman, and it's the law in NDMA, or National Defense of Marriage Act, or whatever. And, your state has banned it, and why can't the states do it? Because my state would ban it, or this, that, or the other. And let me tell you, and I've had this discussion before with, my own parents, and it's telling when staunch conservatives like my parents agree with libertarian ideas, because the thing is, they're not exposed to libertarianism, and most people aren't, because, quite frankly, the libertarian movement is horrible about outreach. And the only person that seemed to have a clue about it was Ron Paul, and he's obviously out of the game. So hopefully, that's something that will get picked up by the Rand Paul group, but, there's no holding our breath on that. We must do this ourselves. So to give a perfect example would be obviously the gay marriage thing. And many conservatives think that, it's in the Bible, so it ain't right, and they shouldn't do it because we'll be like Sodom and Gomorrah and God will rain fire on us. And there's so much wrong with that, namely that the state having a policy will not dictate the amount of good people in our nation. I think that we can all agree, those of you who have studied the Bible, that there are much more good people than there were in Sodom and Gomorrah. There wasn't just the one family. So, or Lot and his wife. So that's something you got to remember. It's something you've got to keep in mind in that argument. But the other thing is, do you or do you not believe in freedom? Many of you have the "Don't Tread on Me" Gadsden flag that the Tea Party has kind of adopted. But the idea was, don't tell me what to do. It's none of your business what I do with my life. Mind your business. I mean, that was one of the sayings in the Revolutionary War. Mind your business. Leave me alone. And do you think that the government should be involved in marriage? Because if you think that government should just be involved in preventing gay marriage and should leave straight marriage alone, then you've forgotten what government does. Because government does not just involve itself in one and not the other. It is involved in everything. If you give it one subject, it will completely and totally infest and take over that idea. And that's not something that's going to change anytime soon. That's not something that we can omit or change. That's a fact. The state is pervasive, and the state always grows. It never gives up its power. So when it comes to gay marriage, you have to ask yourself, do you or do you not think the government should be able to tell you, straight, gay, whatever, what you can or cannot do in your marriage? Who you can or cannot marry? How you can or cannot live your life? If the answer is no, government should not be telling me how to live my life, then you cannot be opposed to gay marriage. Now, you also have to keep in mind that because we have a First Amendment in this country, gay marriage has nothing to do with religion. Now, a lot of you say that gay marriage is against the Bible, it's a sin, and we must fight it. And you just need to remember, they cannot force a church to marry a gay couple. So if you're worried about your church or your religious community being forced to deal with this, they won't. It's illegal for the government to force churches to comply. I believe it's illegal for businesses to be forced to comply. I think it's completely illegal, and the courts agree for the most part, that businesses be forced to do work for situations they don't approve of. You should be able to turn down a service or performing a service when you disagree with what is being done. Granted, I don't believe in making people second-class citizens, but the amount of people who turn down work because they want to stand on principle is very, very small. This is not the civil rights movement all over again. This is not the 1950s or 60s where black people are being refused service at restaurants in a blanket movement. This is not segregation. To say that one bakery in the nation, I think there's been 3 reports of this at the most, of a bakery refusing to bake a cake for a gay couple's wedding. That bakery is turning down perfectly good money for their service period. They are refusing to do something profitable. They're refusing to do the work that they got into business to do. So the notion that we should force them to do it is asinine. It is in their best interest to bake that cake. If they choose to be dumb and not take business when it's given to them, that is entirely their choice and their fault, quite frankly. And it's something we need to keep in mind when it comes to this whole debate. And it needs to be understood that if you put government into this even a little bit, government will be involved completely. That's how they work. For example, marriage laws started in the States trying to prevent interracial couples. It was a big concern in the early days of our country that white girls were going to marry Chinese, Mexicans, and blacks. I mean, that was part of some of the more ridiculous arguments against weed, that, white girls would smoke weed and would just become so out of control with their libido that they would start sleeping with Chinese and Mexican men. I'm not even making that up. That's a real thing. That's actually a thing in history. So you can look that up. There's a great video on the Learn Liberty channel on YouTube that discusses some of the more ridiculous arguments against marijuana legalization. And that is on there. And it's this notion that, people were concerned about interracial marriage being this horrible thing, or interracial relations for that matter. And laws were passed in some of the southern states to prevent, black men and black women from marrying white men and white women. And so the government got involved to outlaw interracial marriage. And then the federal government stepped in and said, no, you cannot do this. And so they began regulating marriage. And then it became a licensing issue. And then it became, an issue with divorce on who gets what. And then it became an issue on custody. And then it became an issue on taxes. And it's just spiraled out from trying to think about that for a second. All of the marriage laws, including, who's your health proxy, who inherits your stuff, who gets what in the divorce, how you file your taxes, all of these marriage laws in our country stem from the government trying to prevent racist marriage laws in the South. So all of these regulations, all of this sweeping government control over marriage stemmed from good intentions in government. Now, this is what I meant when I said it matters how you get there. Democrats think that the federal government needs to pass laws saying gay people, LGBTQs, can get married to whoever they want, whatever they want. The problem with that is that it implies people need the government's permission to do something that has nothing to do with government. Democrats think people need government's permission to do something they should be able to do simply because they are alive. It stems from their right to life. Marriage, as far as government is concerned, is about property now. It is about who owns what. A marriage contract, as far as the government is concerned, and that's just the government, which means no church, no God involvement, just government paperwork, just a license. It's all about contracting that somebody owns half your stuff. That's it. It also comes with health proxy and how you file your taxes. But the point is, it's just business. It's a contract. It's got nothing to do with spirituality. It's all about ownership, and it's property rights. Property rights are natural. The idea that we need government to tell us who you can or cannot say owns half of your stuff violates our inalienable